So what would it look like for you if it were different? If you didn't have that responsibility and if they weren't leaning on you?
Toni Braxton didn't just hold the mic, she held her entire family together. And now, after years of silence, the truth is finally spilling out. She was the backbone, the breadwinner, and the emotional anchor while everyone else rode the wave. Of her success from the front row, rewinding the benefits without ever pressing play on real support. From childhood, Toni was forced to grow up fast. She didn't get the luxury of ease or innocence. She was the one expected to perform, provide, and protect. Behind the glitz of the Braxton family name was a reality drenched in dysfunction, buried resentment, unchecked entitlement, and an IRA's unspoken rule that everything would somehow fall on Toni's shoulders. And fall it did. Her recent revelations have shattered the image of unity the public bought into. Toni openly named Traci and Towanda, not to shame, but to shed light. She says they crossed lines, took advantage, and drained her resources, both financial and emotional. And somehow, even after giving so much, she was left feeling like it was never enough. We clapped for their bond on screen, not realizing we were watching a woman drown in silence, expected to house, clothe, feed, and breathe for everyone. That kind of exhaustion doesn't show up in headlines or on red carpets. That's the grief money can't soothe, and applause can't erase. The hardest part? Being the one who made it out, only to become the lifeline for those who won't let you fly. Toni herself said it. I feel like they don't let me. So now that the Braxtons are back on our screens, let's not just admire Toni's glow. Let's honor the truth behind it. Long before your favorite R&B stars had a playlist, she was setting the bar. Give her her crown. She earned it in silence. Toni Braxton didn't just sing for her family, she sustained them. She wasn't just holding the mic, she was holding the weight of a name, a legacy, and a household. While the world applauded her voice and her fame, behind the scenes, she was emotionally and financially stretched to her limit, supporting a family who believed her success was theirs to share. Toni Braxton is one of the most talented singers to ever step onto a stage. She's won 7 Grammy Awards, sold over 70 million records around the world, and her voice has the kind of power that can move you to tears, whether you're sitting in a church pew or dancing in a nightclub. By every definition, she's a music icon. But behind all that fame and success, her real life tells a much different story. You might think someone with $170 million in music sales would be set for life. But at one point, Toni looked at her bank account and saw only $1,972. That's not a typo. After decades of hard work, chart-topping songs, and sold-out shows, that was all she had left to her name. It's shocking, but when you hear what she's been through, it sadly makes sense. Toni grew up in Severn, Maryland, a small town filled with big dreams. She was the oldest of 6 kids in a family that loved music, especially gospel. Her mother was the heart of the household, encouraging her children to sing and follow their dreams. But things changed quickly when Toni was just a teenager. Her mom had a serious accident that left her hospitalized for a long time. That's when Toni had to grow up fast. At just 13 or 14 years old, she became like a second mother to her siblings. She made sure they ate, got to school, and had a place to sleep. While her dad worked hard to provide for the family, Toni took on the emotional load. Childhood for her ended early. Fast forward a few years, and Toni's talent took her to the top of the charts. Songs like Unbreak My Heart and Breathe Again made her a household name in the 1990s. She was living the dream that so many artists chase. But the dream wasn't all it seemed. Instead of celebrating her success, some of Toni's own family started to treat her less like a sister and more like a bank. She says they came to her for money, expecting her to pay for everything: rent, car payments, business ventures, and more. And she did. She helped everyone because that's who she was. Kind, generous, and loyal to a fault. But giving so much started to take a toll. Toni never said exactly how much she spent on her family, but from the way she talks about it, it was a lot. And it wasn't just money. She gave her time, her energy, and her emotional strength to keep everyone else afloat. Meanwhile, her own needs were pushed to the side. Being the star of the family came with a heavy price. She carried the Braxton name like a brand. but also like a burden. Whenever someone needed something, they came to Toni. And as the years went by, it drained her, financially and emotionally. She may have looked flawless on red carpets and award shows, but behind closed doors, she was struggling to hold everything together. What makes this even harder to accept is that Toni's generosity wasn't always met with gratitude. In fact, she's shared that some of her sisters resented how much more money she and Tamar were earning from their projects. Instead of being proud, there was jealousy. Tensions grew so high that it even affected the filming of their reality show, and Toni eventually walked off set, overwhelmed and exhausted. It's hard to imagine how someone so successful could end. Up broke more than once, but it happened. And it wasn't just her family that caused it. Toni also had a terrible record deal early in her career. She was only earning 35 cents per album sold, while the label took the rest. Even though she was the face of the music, the money wasn't going to her. She was even responsible for paying back the costs of her music videos, wardrobe, travel, and more. Basically, she was paying for her own fame and getting very little in return. That's why she filed for bankruptcy not once, but twice. And each time, it wasn't because she was spending wildly, but because she was trying to keep everyone else above water while being taken advantage of by the industry.
Burden on you is the one that made it out. But you gotta be willing to let them fly.
Even in the face of illness, Toni was diagnosed with lupus and microvascular angina in 2010. She kept pushing forward. She had to cancel her Las Vegas residency due to her health, and because insurance wouldn't cover the cancellation, she paid for everything herself: the hotel rooms, staff, musicians, lighting, and full production costs. Through it all, she's been open about how hard it's been to carry so much for so long. She once said, "I let everyone's financial responsibilities become mine." That sentence alone shows the emotional weight she's been carrying. She wanted to help the people she loved, but in the process, she lost pieces of herself. Now looking back, it's clear Toni Braxton never had the chance to simply be Toni. She was the provider, the protector, the peacekeeper. But in being everything for everyone, she was often left with nothing for herself. Her story is a reminder that fame doesn't protect you from pain, that even the strongest people have breaking points, and that sometimes the person who seems to have it all might be the one holding on by a thread. Toni Braxton deserves more than our applause. She deserves our respect, our understanding, and a little peace, finally, for herself. While Tamar, despite her reputation for being fiery, at least paid her dues and showed some loyalty, others, particularly Traci and Towanda, Toni all but confirmed, took far more than they gave. Being paid to work with their sister seemed more important than acknowledging the toll it took on her spirit. And then came a moment that hit deeper than the rest. Toni's own mother once admitted, "You could have soared higher if you weren't carrying so much." Toni agreed. "I feel like I could have," she replied. That wasn't just about money. That was about dreams deferred in service to a family that never saw her breaking point. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, Toni's financial woes hit a peak. Despite being a global sensation, she ended up in bankruptcy not once, but twice. The culprit? A shady record deal that gave her pennies per album, 35 cents to be exact, while she unknowingly footed the bill for her own fame. Clothes, music, videos, travel, all coming out of her pocket, not the labels. In 1998, she finally pushed back and took her label to court. But just 8 weeks later, she was forced to file for bankruptcy. Not because she lived beyond her means, but because the system she trusted had quietly bled her dry. And then came that interview with Oprah. What should have been a moment of solidarity between two powerful Black women turned into one of Toni's most painful public experiences. Oprah asked with a chilling lack of empathy, "Why are you broke if you're famous?" The implication? That Toni had done this to herself. That she mismanaged, overspent, or didn't understand her own worth. What the world didn't see was a woman who had done the math, who knew something wasn't adding up, who, despite fighting to hold everything together, was treated like the problem instead of the victim. Toni Braxton's journey is not just a cautionary tale about the music industry. It's a lesson in emotional labor, sacrifice, and the price of being the one who made it. She wasn't just building her own career, she was carrying a family, a business, and a brand, all while barely being allowed to breathe. So the next time her name is mentioned, let's not just think of the ballads. Let's remember the woman who gave everything, often getting nothing back. Toni Braxton's life has been a symphony of success and sacrifice, but behind the awards and applause lies a melody soaked in pain, pressure, and responsibility no one prepared her for. By 2010, she was trying to rebuild, but life once again hit her with a blow she never saw coming. Diagnosed with lupus and microvascular angina, Toni was forced to cancel her high-profile Las Vegas residency, a gig that could have offered the financial stability she desperately needed. To make matters worse, her insurance didn't cover the cancellation. And just like that, Toni found herself paying out of pocket for everything: hotels, staff salaries, lighting, musicians, full production. Another bankruptcy followed, and this time she was brutally honest about the cause. "I let everyone's financial responsibilities become mine." By 2018, Toni Braxton had already weathered more storms than most could imagine. But just when it seemed like things might finally settle, another wave came crashing in, this time in the form of financial disaster. The IRS and the California Franchise Tax Board both came after her with tax liens that totaled close to $500,000. It was a devastating blow for someone who had already endured 2 bankruptcies, mounting health issues, and years of emotional exhaustion. At this point in her life, Toni wasn't just an award-winning singer. She was also a provider for an entire family. Despite her fame, her finances had long been stretched thin by the constant demands of others. And now, with government agencies threatening to seize her property, she was facing the terrifying reality of losing everything she had built. What made the situation worse was the silence from her own siblings. In interviews, Toni has admitted that aside from Tamar, none of her sisters ever truly stepped up to help her carry the financial burden, even with something as routine as their mother's car insurance. It wasn't just about money, it was about support. And when she needed it most, no one else seemed willing to offer it. She was carrying the emotional weight of the entire family, while also trying to stay afloat financially and physically. Meanwhile, the Braxton family's reality show continued to paint a picture of unity and sisterhood. But behind the camera, tensions were growing. Long simmering resentment, especially over pay differences between the sisters, finally boiled over. Arguments erupted. Production was halted. And Toni, who had always been the quiet glue holding it all together, finally hit her breaking point. She made a decision that surprised many. She walked away. For years, Toni had been the backbone of the Braxton brand. She was the one people leaned on when things went wrong, the fixer, the financial support, the emotional rock. But at some point, even the strongest shoulders collapse under too much weight. Toni had been pushed to that point. She wasn't just walking away from a show, she was stepping away from being the unpaid emotional laborer of her family's dysfunction. She had reached the moment where peace of mind meant more than ratings, more than appearances, more than holding everything together. And it wasn't because she didn't love her family, it was because she realized that love shouldn't always come with a price tag, and hers had, for far too long. Toni Braxton's decision to step back was more than just a personal one. It was a quiet act of reclaiming herself. After years of giving, of carrying, of sacrificing, she chose herself for once. And though it may have fractured relationships even further, it also may have saved her spirit. The tension boiled over even more when their beloved sister Traci passed away in 2022. Traci had endured years of quiet heartbreak, starting from when she was left out of the sisters' original record deal due to an early pregnancy. That pain never fully healed, and her death left behind a silence full of grief, regret, and things left unsaid. Toni later said, "I don't want to be the strong one anymore," a sentiment that resonated far beyond celebrity headlines. For every eldest daughter, every fixer, every woman who's had to carry too much, those words were a quiet scream for help.
About 13 or 14, my mom, she had a really bad accident. She fell. Her back was really messed up, so she was in hospital a long time. And so
Then, just as the Braxtons returned to television, Tamar made a controversial move. She brought Ashley Braxton, Trina's estranged niece, onto the show. Ashley, who had been all but erased from the family dynamic after coming forward at 16, with claims of inappropriate behavior from Trina's ex-husband, had lived in quiet isolation for years. Tamar insisted it wasn't about stirring drama, but about offering Ashley a chance to be seen, heard, and supported. Still, the move split the family even further. Lines were drawn, sides were chosen, and the cameras once again captured pain instead of healing. Toni, for her part, has quietly stepped back. Not because she's indifferent, but because she's exhausted. She's lost money, her health, and now her peace. What started as a reality show about family bonds has exposed deep-rooted wounds, generational silence, and an emotional toll that can't be fixed in a season finale. The truth is, even legends can break. Even icons can feel abandoned. And even the strongest ones need someone, anyone, to ask, "Are you okay?" So what's the real story of the Braxtons? It's not just about fame, fortune, or feuds. It's about what happens when love becomes labor, when family turns into obligation, when silence becomes survival. And finally, someone, Toni, is saying, "I'm not holding this in anymore.